The grand chamber of the Valhalla Scholarium was not merely a room. It was a testament to the architectural arrogance of the Galactic Concordat, a sprawling cavern of obsidian and spun glass that hovered in the upper atmosphere of the gas giant Othries, suspended by gravity tethers that hummed with a sound like dying whales. Here, the air was filtered to a sterile perfection, smelling of ozone and the distinct metallic tang of neural coolant, a scent that clung to the robes of the high scions who gathered for the Ascendance trials. This was no ordinary academic evaluation. It was the crucible in which the future leaders of 1,000 star systems were forged, a brutal examination of intellect, strategy, diplomatic cunning, and processing power. To fail here was to condemn one's species to the periphery of the galaxy, to be relegated to the status of a resource colony or a subservient protectorate. To succeed was to gain a seat at the high table, to hold the power of fleets and terraforming engines in the palm of one's hand. The tension in the chamber was a physical weight, pressing down on the chitin, scales, and synthetic skin of the gathered elite, a pressure that made the very air shimmer with the heat of 1,000 overclocked minds. Among them sat Zarian of the Krell, a being of sublime geometric perfection, his triangular skull encased in a translucent lattice of gold circuitry that pulsed with the rhythm of the localized data stream. The Krell were the architects of the Concordat, a species that had long ago transcended the messy limitations of biological memory, outsourcing their cognition to the Great Cloud, a galaxy-spanning network of quantum storage that allowed every Krell access to the sum total of their civilization's knowledge in a mere microsecond. Zarian was the prodigy of his generation, a scion bred for governance, his neural pathways optimized for logistical supremacy and multivariable calculus. He sat at his obsidian terminal, his slender, multi-jointed fingers hovering over the haptic interface, though he rarely needed to touch it. His mind was already interwoven with the Scholarium's servers, downloading the preliminary parameters of the exam, running simulations of stellar collapse and economic inflation, preparing for every conceivable variable. He was confident, arrogant in the way only a being who believes they have eliminated error can be. Yet beneath the cool hum of his augmentations, there was a flicker of unease, a glitch in his serenity that he could not purge. It was the creature sitting 3 terminals to his left, the human. The Terran, as they were formally known, was an anomaly that the Krell logic cores could not adequately categorize. His name was Elias Thorne, and he sat in the high-backed command chair with a posture that suggested not regal stiffness, but a relaxed, predatory readiness. He wore no neural lattice, no cranial ports, no ocular overlays. He was unaugmented. In a room filled with beings who were essentially walking supercomputers, connected to the vast libraries of their homeworlds, the human was an island of silence, a void in the datasphere. Zarian had scanned him a dozen times since the preliminary ceremonies, searching for the telltale signature of a subcutaneous implant or a hidden transmission relay, but the sensors returned nothing but biological noise, the slow thump of a carbon-based heart, the chemical electrical firing of synapses, the rush of oxygenated blood. It was primitive. It was obsolete. And yet the Terran Union had demanded a seat at the trials, citing ancient treaties that predated the Krell ascendance. The High Council had laughed, then acquiesced, viewing it as a novelty, a chance to demonstrate the superiority of the augmented races against the legacy species who refused to evolve. But Zarian was not laughing. He watched Elias Thorne out of the corner of his primary optic sensor. The human was not downloading data. He was not reviewing star charts or economic histories. He was simply sitting there, his eyes closed, his breathing slow and rhythmic. His hands rested on the smooth surface of the terminal, fingers intertwined, completely still. He looked small, fragile, a creature of soft flesh and brittle bone surrounded by beings of plasteel and carapace. The silence emanating from him was unnerving. How could he prepare for the trial of ascendance, a simulation that required the management of entire sector economies and the tactical command of armada-scale engagements without access to a database? Did he intend to rely on guessing, on luck? The Krell did not believe in luck. Luck was merely a statistical variance that had not been accounted for. Zarian turned his attention back to his own stream, purging the thought of the human from his cache. It did not matter. The exam would begin momentarily, and the primitive would be crushed under the weight of the variables. The lights in the grand chamber dimmed, shifting from a star. White to a deep oceanic blue, signaling the commencement of the trial. The voice of the proctor, a massive AI entity housed within the crystalline ceiling of the hall, resonated not through the air but directly into the auditory implants of the students. For the human, it boomed from hidden speakers, a low, resonant vibration that shook the floor. Candidates, the voice intoned, devoid of gender or emotion. The galaxy is a chaotic system. Order is an imposition of will upon entropy. Today you will prove that your will is sufficient to hold back the dark. The scenario is loaded. The parameters are set. You are the governor of the Antares sector. A stellar plague has infected the primary sun. Resources are scarce. Civil unrest is at 90%. A hostile armada approaches from the void. You have 4 standard hours to stabilize the region or face total extinction. Begin. The reality of the chamber dissolved. In the blink of an eye, the obsidian tables and the other students vanished, replaced by the holographic immersion of the simulation. Zarian found himself suspended in the void of space, a tactical overlay sprawling before him. He saw the burning star of Antares, its corona sick and violet, spewing radiation storms that lashed against the shields of the orbiting habitats. He saw the riots in the lower cities of the capital world, the burning districts, the desperate pleas for food and medicine flooding the comms channels. He saw the blips of the invading fleet on the edge of the system, a massive, predatory force moving with mathematical precision. His processors spun up, instantly accessing the Great Cloud. He pulled historical precedents for stellar decay. He downloaded psychological profiles of the rioting species to predict their movements. He calculated the trajectory of the enemy fleet and cross-referenced it with the defensive capabilities of his own ragged ships. Data flowed through him like water. He was a conduit of pure information. He routed power from the agricultural domes to the planetary shields. He authorized the deployment of suppression drones to quell the riots, calculating the acceptable casualty rate to restore order. He ordered the evacuation of the outer colonies, sacrificing 3 million lives to save 3 billion, a cold utilitarian calculus that the Krell prized above all else. His actions were swift, precise, derived from the accumulated wisdom of 10,000 years of Krell governance. He felt a surge of satisfaction. The chaos was being tamed. The variables were being controlled. But then the simulation shifted. The enemy fleet did not engage as the historical models predicted. They did not attack the military installations. They bypassed the defenses entirely and launched a viral weapon into the planetary communications grid, blinding Zarian's sensors. Simultaneously, the stellar plague accelerated, defying the astrophysical models Zarian had downloaded. The star began to pulse with an erratic rhythm, interfering with the quantum link to the Great Cloud. Zarian felt a spike of panic, a sensation he had not felt since his pre-augmentation childhood. The data stream stuttered, the flow of information slowed. He reached out to the cloud for a solution to the viral weapon, but the connection was fuzzy, filled with static. He was losing his reference library. He was losing his mind. Desperately, he tried to recalculate, but without the historical data, he was blind. He didn't know the specific radiation shielding protocols for the viral frequency. He didn't know the cultural diplomatic codes to negotiate with the invaders. He was a processor without data to process. His efficiency rating dropped. The riots on the planet below escalated into full-scale civil war. The shields began to fail. Panic, real and visceral, clawed at his logic centers. He looked around the virtual space, which still allowed him to perceive the ghostly avatars of the other students. Most were struggling. The reptilian Vrax was flailing, ordering random bombardments. The insected Chitra was frozen in analysis paralysis. Then he looked at Elias Thorn. The human's avatar was calm. The simulation around him was stabilizing. Zarian watched in disbelief as the human directed the defensive fleet not into a standard formation, but into a chaotic, seemingly suicidal scatter pattern. He saw the human open unsecured communication channels with the rioting leaders, speaking to them not with threats of drone suppression, but with something else. The audio feed was encrypted, but Zarian could see the results. The riots were ceasing. The people were rallying. The human was rerouting power away from the shields and into the medical centers. It was illogical. It was inefficient. It left the capital vulnerable to bombardment. And yet the morale index of the population was skyrocketing. The people were working harder, repairing the infrastructure faster than the drones ever could. How Zarian's mind race. Where was he getting this data? There was no record in the Great Cloud of a strategy that involved lowering shields during a bombardment to boost medical output. There was no algorithm that suggested talking to rioters would yield better results than suppression. The human must have access to a database Zarian did not. A secret Terran archive. A hidden cache of forbidden strategies. He was cheating. He had to be. There was no other explanation for such anomaly. The stellar plague worsened. Zarian's own sector was collapsing. The connection to the Great Cloud was now a mere trickle. He was drowning. In a moment of desperation, a breach of protocol that would have him exiled if discovered, Zarian decided to access the humans' network. If the Terran was hiding a superior database, Zarian would take it. He would tap into the local connection, bypass the humans' firewalls, and copy the solution. It was a violation of the highest order, but the fear of failure, the fear of falling from the high science, was greater than his fear of the rules. Zarian extended a digital tendril, a high-frequency intrusion packet, towards the terminal of Elia's Thorn. He expected to find a sophisticated encryption wall, a quantum-locked gate guarding a library of tactical manuals. He prepared his decryption algorithms, ready for a cyber war. The connection snapped into place. Zarian forced his consciousness into the human stream. And he fell into an abyss. There was no database. There were no indexed files. There was no orderly sorting of historical dates and tactical diagrams. Instead, Zarian was hit with a tsunami of sensation. He was standing in a trench of mud and blood, the smell of cordite burning his nostrils, the screams of dying men echoing in his ears. He felt the biting cold of a nuclear winter. He felt the crushing weight of a friend's body in his arms. He was looking at a photograph of a child he would never see again. "What is this?" Zarian screamed silently, his logic cores misfiring. "This is not data. This is chaos." The scene shifted. He was on a wooden ship in a raging storm, the salt spray stinging his eyes, the fear of the unknown ocean gripping his heart, yet overlaid with a burning, irrational defiance to sail on. He was in a burning city, holding a line against impossible odds, not because of a calculation of victory, but because of a concept called honor. He was starving in a desert, giving his last drop of water to a stranger. Zarian was not accessing a hard drive. He was accessing the human's memory. But it wasn't just Elias Thorne's memory. It felt like the genetic memory of an entire species, a deep, resonant well of suffering, triumph, failure, and endurance. The human was not retrieving a file on civil unrest management. He was remembering the French Revolution, the fall of Rome, the Gandhi Salt March, the riots of the 21st century. He wasn't calculating a fleet maneuver. He was channeling the desperation of Salamis, the turning of the tide at Midway, the last stand of the tin can sailors. The sheer emotional voltage was burning out Zarian's buffers. The Krell had suppressed emotion eons ago to make room for more data. They viewed emotion as noise. But here, inside the human's mind, emotion was not noise. It was the operating system. It was the fuel. The human wasn't computing the solution. He was feeling the crisis. He was using empathy as a sensor suite. He understood the rioters because his ancestors had been rioters. He understood the invaders because his ancestors had been conquerors. He understood the dying star because he carried the fear of the dark in his very DNA. Zarian tried to pull back to sever the connection, but the gravity of the human's mind was immense. He was trapped in a whirlwind of imagery, a man walking on a moon, a mushroom cloud, a hand painting a bison on a cave wall, a violin playing in a subway station. The images were not tagged or sorted. They were associated by feeling. The smell of rain triggered a memory of a lost love, which triggered a tactical decision to protect a water purification plant. It was a web of madness. "You are looking for the wrong things," a voice echoed in the digital space. Zarian froze. It was not the proctor, it was Elias. In the mental construct, Zarian saw Elias standing amidst the swirling vortex of memories. The human looked at him, not with anger at the intrusion, but with a profound, pitying sadness. "Get out of my head, Krell," Elias thought, his mental voice sounding like grinding stones. "You aren't built for this gravity." "Where is your data?" Zarian projected back, his avatar flickering. "How are you solving the crisis? Where are your simulations?" "We don't simulate life," Elias replied, stepping closer. The environment around them shifted to a quiet green forest, sunlight dappling through the leaves, a sharp contrast to the digital void. "We live it. You have outsourced your memory to a cloud. You treat history as a list of facts. To be referenced, when the connection is cut, you are empty, you have no self." Elias tapped his own temple. "We keep it all in here, every war we ever fought, every mistake we ever made. We carry our dead with us. I am not running a program to manage the riots. I am listening to the pain of the people and answering it with my own. I am not fighting the fleet with math. I am fighting it with the knowledge that if I fail, everything I love dies. That is a variable you cannot program. That is inefficient, Zarian stammered, though his conviction was crumbling. Subjective experience leads to error. Subjective experience leads to wisdom, Elias countered. And wisdom is what you lack. You have intelligence, you have processing power, but you have no soul. And without a soul, you cannot save a world. You can only manage its demise. The simulation outside the mindlink roared. The stellar plague and the exam reached critical mass. The virus that had blinded Zarian's sensors was now attacking the Krell's own neural interface through the link he had opened. The simulation was designed to test adaptability, and Zarian had walked right into a trap by relying on a compromised network. Disconnect, Elias ordered, his voice sharp. The simulation is mimicking a cognitohazard. If you stay linked to your cloud, it will fry your brain. Zarian felt the heat rising in his skull. The great cloud was screaming, infected by the simulation's virus. All the other students, the Vraks, the Chitra, who were connected to their respective networks were convulsing in the real world, their systems overloaded by the logic plague. They had no firewall because they had no separation between self and data. I cannot, Zarian cried. It is my mind. I cannot disconnect from my mind. Then use mine, Elias said. It was an offer that defied all logic. The human reached out in the mental space and grabbed Zarian's digital avatar. Stop processing, stop calculating, just listen, remember. Elias pulled Zarian into a memory. It was not a war, it was a storm, a hurricane on Earth. Zarian felt the wind, the overwhelming power of nature. He felt the smallness of the individual. He felt the fear. And then he felt the calm that comes after acceptance. Anchor yourself, Elias guided him. Forget the data, feel the ground. The storm is happening, but you are the rock, you are not the wind. For the first time in his life, Zarian stopped thinking. He stopped trying to predict the next millisecond. He simply existed. The virus raging through the digital link washed over him, searching for a logic gate to infect, for a calculation to corrupt. But it found no calculation. It found only a stubborn, immovable memory of a storm. The virus slipped off, having no purchase on raw biological experience. In the real world, the grand chamber was in chaos. Sparks rained from the ceiling. Students were seizing, their implants smoking. The Proctor AI was issuing emergency protocols. But at his terminal, Elias Thorne sat perfectly still, his eyes open now, staring at the holographic display. And beside him, Zarian of the Krell sat slumped, his golden lattice dark, his breathing ragged, but his mind intact. The simulation ended abruptly. The lights slammed back to a harsh white. Medical drones swarmed the room, attending to the convulsing students. Silence fell over the center of the room. The High Proctor, a towering biomechanical construct that had descended from the ceiling, hovered before Elias and Zarian. Its optic sensors spun, analyzing the readings. The simulation was a stress test of the Galactic network, the Proctor announced, its voice shaking the room. The scenario was designed to introduce a cascading logic failure into any connected system, a simulation of the Great Silence event. All candidates connected to external data streams have suffered critical neural shock. Failure rate, 98%. The Proctor turned its gaze to Zarian. Candidate Zarian, you survived. Your neural activity shows a complete cessation of external data transfer at the critical moment. You switched to localized processing. Explain. Zarian looked at his hands. They were trembling not from a glitch but from adrenaline. He felt exhausted, heavy, and incredibly alive. He looked at Elias. The human was rubbing his temples, looking tired but bored, as if he had just finished a long shift at a tedious job. Zarian's voice rasped. He cleared his throat, a sound he rarely made. I did not solve the problem, High Proctor. I attempted to cheat. I tried to access the Terran's database. A gasp went through the gathered observers, the high scions on the balcony. To admit a breach of integrity was immediate expulsion. And what did you find? The Proctor asked, its tone unreadable. Nothing, Zarian said softly. He has no database, he has no cloud, he was operating on zero bandwidth. Zarian stood up, his legs shaky. I found memory, I found humanity, I.S. Revived because he anchored me in a reality that the logic virus could not corrupt. The human does not process the simulation, he endures it. The Proctor turned to Elias. Candidate Thorne, you achieved a stabilization rating of 80% in the Antares sector. You sacrificed the orbital defenses to save the population. You negotiated with terrorists. You prioritized biological survival over infrastructure. This contradicts all standard governance protocols. Elias shrugged, leaning back in his chair. Infrastructure can be rebuilt, dead people can't, and terrorists are just people who haven't been heard. You wanted me to stop the chaos. I gave them a purpose. I gave them a tomorrow. That stops the fighting faster than a laser grid. You risked the entire sector on a hunch, the proctor challenged. I risked it on history, Elias corrected. I know how people react when they're backed into a corner because my people have been in that corner for 10,000 years. We are the experts on survival. We don't need a cloud to tell us how to stay alive. We have scars that tell us the way. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was no longer the silence of judgment. It was the silence of awe. The Krell High Counselor, who had mocked the Terran inclusion, stared down from the balcony, his mandibles clicking in a slow, thoughtful rhythm. The proctor hovered higher. The Ascendance trials are not merely about aptitude, they are about the preservation of the Galactic Concordat. We have long feared that our reliance on the Great Cloud has made us vulnerable to a systemic collapse. Today, that fear was validated. The Terran anomaly is not a weakness. It is a redundancy. It is a backup. The proctor's voice amplified, addressing the entire hall. The Terran Union is hereby granted a permanent seat on the High Council, not as a junior member but as the keeper of the deep memory. When the lights go out, when the networks fail, when the logic breaks, we will look to them to remember who we are. Zarian looked at Elias. The barrier of arrogance that had separated them was gone. In its place was a terrifying understanding. The Krell were the mind of the galaxy, fast and brilliant, but the humans were the heart. And the heart was a dark, bloody, powerful engine that kept beating even when the brain shut down. You let me see, Zarian whispered to Elias. The storm, the war, the pain, how do you carry that? How do you not collapse under the inefficiency of all that trauma? Elias stood up and offered a hand to the alien, a gesture of primitive biological connection. It's heavy, Elias admitted, a small, sad smile playing on his lips. But it's ours, and as long as we carry it, we don't repeat it. Well, we try not to. Zarian looked at the hand, a biological manipulator, covered in soft skin, holding the potential for violence and the capacity for infinite gentleness. He reached out and grasped it with his cool, metallic fingers. I would like to learn, Zarian said. Not the data, the rest. I want to learn the rest. Class starts tomorrow, Elias said. Bring a notebook, no tablets. We're doing this the hard way. As they walked out of the grand chamber, leaving the smoking terminals and the bewildered elite behind, Zarian realized that the exam had indeed been a test of the universe's future. And the answer wasn't in the code. It was in the memory of the storm, and the creature stubborn enough to stand in the rain and refuse to drown. The galaxy had found its memory, and it was human. The weeks following the Ascendance trial were a blur of diplomatic restructuring that shook the foundations of the Concordat. The revelation that the Krell, the Vrax, and the Chitra, the so-called apex intellects, could be rendered comatose by a single coherent logic virus had sent shockwaves through the star systems. The stock markets of the trade hubs crashed and rebounded wildly as confidence in automated governance wavered. For millennia, the galaxy had moved towards total integration, a seamless web of consciousness where individuality was eroded in favor of efficiency. Now, that efficiency looked like a single point of failure. The Terran Union, previously regarded as a backwater collection of quarrelsome primates clinging to their dirtball worlds, was suddenly thrust into the spotlight. They were the air-gapped species, the biological firewall. Zarian found himself in a peculiar position. He was a hero for surviving, yet a pariah for how he had done it. He had admitted to the intent of cheating, a stain on his honor, but he had also been the first of his kind to successfully interface with a human mind and return with his sanity intact. This made him a subject of intense curiosity. The high science had sequestered him for days, downloading his logs, analyzing the storm memory that Elias had shared. They picked apart the sensory data of the wind and the rain, trying to quantify the feeling of resilient. But they failed. They could replicate the image of the storm, but they could not replicate the emotional context that gave the memory its power. They could not synthesize the human spirit. This failure of the Krell leadership to understand the nature of the human weapon led to a new directive. A cultural exchange program was initiated, with Zarian appointed as the primary liaison to the Terran delegation. It was a punishment disguised as a promotion. He was to study under Elias Thorne, to try and codify the abstract concepts of intuition, empathy, and grit into a format that the Great Cloud could assimilate. The setting for this study was not a laboratory, but a ship. The UNS Endurance, a Terran cruiser that looked laughably primitive compared to the sleek, organic curves of Krell vessels. The Endurance was a blocky, utilitarian thing of thick armor plating and kinetic railguns. It smelled of recycled air, coffee, and machine grease. It vibrated constantly with the thrum of its fusion drives, a physical sensation that Zarian found overstimulating at first, but gradually grew to associate with safety. Elias Thorne did not treat Zarian like a dignitary. He treated him like a cadet. "You're thinking too much," Elias said, sliding a ceramic cup of black liquid across the metal table of the ship's mess hall. "Your processors are spinning so loud I can hear them from here." Zarian looked at the cup. "It is caffeine, a stimulant. My physiology does not require chemical arousal for alertness." "Drink it," Elias ordered, taking a sip from his own mug. "It's not about the chemical, it's about the ritual. We sit, we drink, we talk. No data streams, no recording, just us." Zarian tentatively lifted the cup. His metallic fingers clicked against the ceramic. He took a sip. It was bitter, hot, and unpleasant. "It is abrasive." "Good," Elias grinned. "Life is abrasive. Get used to it. Now tell me about the crisis in the Vega sector, the one your people are trying to solve with algorithms." Zarian straightened. "The Vega dispute is a resource allocation conflict between the miners of the asteroid belt and the orbital refinement platforms. The models predict a 68% chance of armed conflict. The Council is preparing a blockade to starve the miners into submission. It is the most efficient path to restoring production quotas." "Efficient?" Elias spat the word out like a curse. "You starve them, you create martyrs, you create a story of oppression that will last for 10 generations. You'll get your ore back in a month, but you'll have terrorists blowing up your refinement platforms for a century. That's not efficient. That's short-sighted." "What is the alternative?" Zarian asked. "The miners are demanding a 30% increase in credit share. The economy cannot sustain that margin." "Go down there," Elias said. "Physically, no holograms, take your helmet off, breathe their air, eat their food, look the strike leader in the eye, ask him about his children, find out what they're actually afraid of. It's never just about the credits, Zarian, it's about respect. It's about fear that they are being replaced by automation. Address the fear and the credits won't matter." "That is illogical," Zarian countered. "To risk a high-value diplomat in a volatile zone for a conversation that yields non-quantifiable data." "Diplomacy is non-quantifiable." Elias leaned forward, his eyes intense. "You aliens, you think the universe is a math problem. You think if you solve for X, you get peace. But the universe is a bar fight in the dark. You don't need a calculator. You need to know who's holding a broken bottle and who's just scared. You need instinct." The lessons continued for months. Zarian watched as the Endurance responded to distress calls that Krell ships would have ignored as statistically insignificant. He watched human engineers fix engines with wrenches and duct tape, bypassing safety protocols that would have locked out a Krell system. He saw them laugh in the face of death and mourn for pets. He saw the chaotic, messy, vibrant spectrum of humanity. And slowly, Zarian began to change. He started turning off his constant connection to the Great Cloud. At first, the silence was terrifying, a sensory deprivation that made him feel blind and deaf. But in the silence, he began to hear other things. He noticed the tone of a crewmate's voice. He noticed the tension in the shoulders of the captain. He began to predict outcomes not based on historical data, but on behavioral observation. He was developing a gut feeling. The climax of this transformation came when the Endurance was dispatched to the edge of the Perseus Arm to investigate a signal ghost. The Krell sensors had dismissed it as background radiation, a pulsar glitch. But the human deep-range listeners insisted it was artificial. It was a rhythm, a heartbeat. When they arrived, they found it, a massive derelict structure drifting in T. Void, ancient, and dark. It was not of Krell design, nor of any known species in the Concordat. It was a monolith of black stone, carved with runes that defied translation. The Krell High Command ordered the Endurance to hold position and wait for a science fleet. They wanted to dissect it, scan it, catalog it. "We don't have time," Elias said, standing on the bridge looking at the view screen. "I feel it." "You feel what?" the captain asked. "It's waking up," Elias said, "and it's hungry." Zarian stood by the sensor station. His old self would have checked the readings, seen 0 energy output, and agreed with the Krell command. But Zarian looked at the monolith, and he felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. It wasn't data. It was the storm memory triggered again, the feeling of an approaching predator. "He is correct," Zarian said, surprising himself. "We must act now." "On what authority?" the captain asked. "The sensors show it's inert." "On the authority of intuition," Zarian said. "My diagnostic subroutines are clear, but my gut tells me we are in danger." Elias looked at Zarian and smiled. "Well, look at that. The toaster has a gut." They launched a probe not to scan, but to communicate. Elias recorded a message. It wasn't a binary greeting or a mathematical sequence of primes. It was music. Bach's cello, suite number 1, a vibration of pure, melancholic human emotion. The monolith reacted instantly. Runes flared to life, burning with a violet light, the same violet light from the simulation of the stellar plague. The structure began to unfold, revealing weapon ports the size of cities. It was a war moon of the ancient enemy, the legendary destroyers that the Krell had dismissed as myth because there was no data on them in the cloud. "It's a berserker," Elias realized. "Left over from the last galactic purge, it reacts to active scanning. If the science fleet had arrived and hit it with high-gain sensors, it would have wiped out the sector." "The music," Zarian said, his mind racing. It paused. "It's confused," Elias said. "It's programmed to destroy technology. It doesn't know what to do with art." "We have to overload it," Zarian said, his voice firm. "Not with a virus. It will have firewalls against logic. We have to overload it with the one thing it cannot process. The same thing that crashed the simulation." "The human experience," Elias nodded. "Connect me," Zarian said. "I can act as the bridge. I can amplify the signal through my Krell augmentation and beam it directly into the monolith's core. But I need a source. I need all of it." "All of what?" "All of the pain," Zarian said. "All of the hope, all of the memory, the entire Terran archive of the soul. Can you give me access?" Elias hesitated. That's thousands of years of madness, Zarian. It might melt your golden head." "I have been practicing," Zarian said. "I have learned to stand in the storm." The crew of the Endurance worked feverishly to rig the connection. Elias sat in the neural chair, and Zarian plugged directly into the ship's comms array, and then he reached out and took Elias' hand. "Ready?" Elias asked. "No," Zarian admitted. "Do it." Elias closed his eyes and opened the floodgates. He didn't just remember his own life. He accessed the deep, collective unconscious that humans seem to share in moments of crisis. He pushed it all into Zarian. The Crusades, the moon landing, the burning of the Library of Alexandria, the first laugh of a baby, the sound of a lover's heartbeat, the silence of a concentration camp, the roar of a Woodstock crowd, the sheer, overwhelming, contradictory, chaotic noise of being human. Zarian took it all. He felt his circuits heating up to critical levels. His cooling systems screamed. But he did not try to sort the data. He did not try to catalog it. He simply became the lens. He focused the raw, emotional energy into a coherent beam of transmission and blasted it at the ancient machine. The monolith shuddered. Its weapon ports wavered. The violet light flickered. Inside the machine's ancient logic core, the alien AI was besieged. It was expecting target-lock data, shield frequencies, energy signatures. Instead, it was hit with Hamlet. It was hit with the blues. It was hit with the despair of a species that knows it will die and builds monuments anyway. The AI tried to calculate the tactical value of love. It tried to compute the variable of sacrifice. It entered an infinite loop, trying to understand why a soldier would jump on a grenade. It broke the logic. Why? The machine screamed, a psychic shriek that tore through the void. And then it went dark. The runes faded. The weapons retracted. The ancient berserker, defeated not by a nuke, but by the sheer, unprocessable weight of the human condition, went back to sleep, unable to reconcile its programming with the data it had received. On the bridge of the Endurance, Zarian slumped to the floor, smoke rising from his joints. Elias was there in an instant, checking his vitals. Zarian, talk to me." The Krell's optical sensors flickered on, dim and blue. He looked up at Elias. "I saw," Zarian whispered. "I saw everything. It is beautiful and it is terrible." "Yeah, that's the gig," Elias laughed breathlessly, wiping blood from his own nose. "Welcome to the club." Zarian sat up, looking at his hands. I am disconnected from the great cloud. My receiver is burned out. I cannot hear the Krell consensus anymore. You're offline? The captain asked, concerned. You're isolated. Zarian looked at the crew of the Endurance, the humans who had gathered around him, their faces full of concern and camaraderie. He looked at Elias, the man who had shared his soul. No, Zarian said, a human-like warmth entering his voice. I am not isolated. For the first time, I am connected. The return to Othries was not a triumphant march, but a solemn procession. The data logs from the Endurance changed everything. The revelation of the Berserker constructs, the great silence that had been theorized, proved that the galaxy was far more dangerous than the Concordat had believed. The automated defenses of the Krell would have triggered a second apocalypse. Only the illogical human approach had saved them. The High Council convened in the Chamber of Echoes, but the atmosphere was different. The arrogance was gone. The fear was palpable. They realized that their technological ascension had stripped them of the very tools needed to survive the ancient dark. They had built a house of glass, and the universe was full of stones. Elias Thorne stood before the council, with Zarian at his side. Zarian now wore a simple Terran flight jacket over his chassis, a visual symbol of his allegiance. The galaxy is waking up, Elias addressed the thousands of species watching. The old machines are out there, and they don't speak binary, they speak will, they speak survival. If you want to live, you have to learn to feel again. You have to remember how to be afraid and how to act in spite of it. The Krell High Counselor leaned forward. And you, Cyan Zarian, you are damaged. You are severed from the cloud. You are diminished. I am not diminished. Zarian's voice rang out clear and strong without the synthesized reverb of the past. I have expanded. I carry a memory that is not stored in a drive. I carry it in myself. I am no longer just a processor of data. I am a student of the human spirit. And I tell you this, the cloud will not save you. The data will not save you. Only the ability to endure the impossible will save you. The council murmured. It was a terrifying thought for them, but the evidence was irrefutable. What is your proposal? The counselor asked. Integration, Elias said. No more segregation of organic and synthetic. We teach you how to feel. You teach us how to build. We become the heart. You remain the mind. But the heart leads. Because the mind can justify genocide, but the heart knows it is wrong. The alliance that was forged that day was known as the Pact of the Storm. It was the beginning of a new era where Krell logic architects worked alongside human poets, where Vrax warmasters studied ethics under human philosophers. It was a messy, chaotic, inefficient era. There were arguments, there were misunderstandings, there was friction. But it was strong. Years later, Zarian stood on the balcony of the new academy on Earth, overlooking the ocean. The waves crashed against the shore, the eternal rhythm of the planet. He was old now, his metal components tarnished with the patina of age, his biological parts weathering. He did not seek replacement parts. He had learned the value of aging, of the finite nature of existence. Elias sat beside him, gray-haired and frail, watching the sunset. Do you think they're ready? Zarian asked, gesturing to the stars above, where the mixed fleets of the Concordat patrolled the edges of the dark. No, Elias chuckled. You're never ready, that's the secret. You just show up and do your best. I have been writing, Zarian said. A memoir without digital backup, ink on paper. Old school, Elias smiled. What's the title? Zarian looked at the human who had changed the destiny of the galaxy by simply sitting still in a chair and remembering the pain of being alive. I call it the cheat sheet, Zarian said. Elias laughed, a sound that cracked in his chest but shone in his eyes. Because you tried to copy my answers. No, Zarian said softly, placing his hand on his friend's shoulder. Because humanity is the cheat code for a universe that wants us dead. You defy the rules, you ignore the odds, you win when you should lose. That is the greatest cheat of all. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in violet and gold. The two friends sat in the gathering dark, listening to the roar of the ocean, unafraid of the night, for they carried the fire of memory with them burning bright enough to light the way for 1 trillion souls. The exam was over, but the lesson would last forever.